All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Frank Whiting. I'm an account executive here at Networks Group, and with us is Michael Cross. Michael has over 20 years experience in the IT world. 15 of those specifically are in leadership within the IT space. He's a former mid-sized enterprise CIO with experience in the fields of retail, hospitality, government, healthcare, and consulting. And he's currently the VP of Operations at Networks Group. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and can't wait to share some practical stories about cybersecurity and integrating into corporate strategy, things from my experience that have worked well.
Sounds like a plan. Quick bio here of Networks Group. We have three main pillars of our service. The compliance pillar, we work with a set of different security frameworks out there like NIST, PCI, which deals with credit cards. We are specifically a QSA for the PCI standard. Our defensive pillar of services revolve around managing, designing networks, managing firewalls, vulnerability management. We have a particularly good tool for detection, prevention, and response of cybersecurity breaches. And then our third pillar is on the offensive side. We do a lot of what's called penetration testing, also known as ethical hacking or third-party risk assessments. There are various aspects that we have available, like on-site physical testing of building security, dedicated web application testing, persistent personnel attacks with social engineering, purple team exercises, and a wide variety of different things to help protect you and your customers' information. So that's who we are as a company. Now, in our agenda today, we're going to cover how to shift the idea and responsibility of security from being driven by the IT department to being driven by the business as a whole, and specifically accomplishing that within the very real world of constrained budgets. We want to specifically talk about strategies we can employ to reduce your security risk, and not only spend money on security, but specifically be able to derive business value from those investments. We'll also talk about when it might make sense to partner with a managed security services provider in order to help accomplish your IT and security goals. So traditionally, security has been IT's responsibility. It was born out of the IT department. We're dealing obviously with computer systems, and so it makes sense that that's where it came from. But just because they're the ones who set it up doesn't mean that it's just their responsibility. Michael, what's been your experience with this?
Well, you're exactly correct, Frank. IT information security being IT's responsibility makes a lot of sense because we're responsible for the implementation, the maintenance, care and feeding of those systems. But who uses those systems is equally as important when you're thinking about your cybersecurity strategy. Who's receiving emails? Who's answering your phones? Who's posting about your organization on social media? Who has access to your network? These are all areas where bad actors could potentially infiltrate your environment, and every single employee in your organization has some level of access and use these systems, right? So it's important to think about cybersecurity strategy as not just being about protecting systems, but protecting people as well. Bad actors, they're taking advantage of people's well-intentions. Most often it's just second nature for your staff to be helpful. They want to help their customers, they want to help their coworkers, and the bad guys will take advantage of that, leveraging that helping attitude, being nice to people, take advantage to get access to things. Frank, you have a story about that.
One of our ethical hackers on an engagement was dealing with an organization which had set up multi-factor authentication, which of course is a great security tool. We absolutely recommend multi-factor authentication. But this is a great example of people undoing the IT in that when our ethical hacker called the help desk, they said, hey, set up a new phone. I need multi-factor authentication set up here. Even though they failed the questions that should disqualify them from being helped. They didn't know their boss's name. They couldn't give the correct old phone number. The IT person wanted to be so helpful. They prompted them with the answers, and then walked our hacker through setting up multi-factor authentication on the phone. That's obviously not the fault of the multi-factor authentication company. Their technology didn't fail, but the humans involved were the ones who brought that about.
Yeah, and the impact of a cybersecurity breach, it really can be an event that really debilitates your organization. Think of other kinds of business events that could happen in your organization that have the breadth and could be as long as a cybersecurity breach. And you think of natural disasters like fires and floods and things of that nature, definitely on the same level there. But the difference here is cybersecurity can be brought on by anyone. Any employee could click on the wrong link or help the wrong person, and now you have an incident that could have devastating consequences. So again, we really want to think about that cybersecurity strategy as being inclusive of the entire organization, not just focused on IT systems.
Yeah. And so the finger pointing often happens, especially when this cultural shift has not happened, when the perception is still that it's on the IT department to handle all of this. If something does happen, then immediately the finger pointing goes on. The IT people, the security people feel like their jobs are on the line. They're the ones that had the sole responsibility. At least that's the perception of the company. While they immediately want to be focusing on shifting blame, saying, hey, we weren't the ones who clicked the link, whatever the case might be. Handling this transition from the IT department versus the entire company being on the same page not only helps avoid the finger pointing, but ideally helps contribute to stopping a breach from ever happening in the first place. So the messaging is very important in order to bring about this cultural shift, bring about the idea of the entire company being in the cybersecurity battle. We need to speak to everyone in terms that make sense for them. This is where you got to put on a marketing or a sales hat and think of the acronym with me. What's in it for me? The fact of the matter is that the message that you tell to the CEO or the CFO just is not the same message that you need to deliver to frontline employees. And so whether you think about it in terms of department or role or creating specific personas of the type of employee, however you want to slice it, think about what's going to make sense to them. What do they need to know? And then how is it going to impact them in their daily lives and why they need to care and be part of the effort.
Yeah, so thanks for setting the stage there, Frank. As we're thinking about implementing cybersecurity strategy, I'm going to share a couple of ideas here on ways that you can have conversations, different conversations with different audiences to help convey that message and speak in terms that people can understand. And one of the areas that I like to start as at the top, getting senior leadership on board with your cybersecurity strategy is really important because they're going to set the tone for the organization. They're going to set the budget, and they're going to be the ones that help push this strategy into the organization, give you what you need to make it happen. Provide that direction for the organization. Of course, it doesn't go any higher than starting at the very top, a conversation with a CEO. The strategy that has worked really well for me is having a conversation with your CEO, not about cybersecurity at all, but about risk. Cybersecurity is a exercise in risk. And so one of the first conversations that you want to have with your CEO that's worked for me is understanding risk tolerance, asking leading questions in a conversation with your CEO to try to pull out of them what is our tolerance for risk in as an organization for our entire organization. Conversation I had with a CEO, when we had this conversation, the statement that I got out of that conversation, very short and simple: keep me out of the papers, keep our organization's name out of the papers. And it is a short and simple statement, but it has a lot of power in that statement that says a lot about the tolerance for risk for the organization. What it says is that the tolerance is pretty low, and the tolerance for external risk is even lower. What are the things that could happen to get our company's name in the paper? Those are the things that are going to be especially important for this particular CEO.
And I love that that's kind of telegraphing the commander's intent, or this is the goal, this is the direction. It's a strategic answer, leaving the individual tactical aspects of that up to you. In comparison, we heard a story from someone that we've worked with a lot. In their rather large organization, there was a new standard which rolled out that had a fee attached to it. If you did not meet X standard, there was a fee. And instead of the CEO saying, okay, great, let's do everything we can in order to protect our customers' information, be compliant with the standard, the question was simply, what's the cost of implementing the standard and what's the fee? Because the cost of implementing the standard was higher than the fee itself, the CEO said, don't worry about it, we'll just pay the fee when it comes up. A very, very different perspective from just keep me out of the headlines.
Yeah, and as you're developing your cybersecurity strategy, having this information is really important, because the strategy that you would implement in organization A, the first example, versus the strategy you would implement in organization B with that second example, very, very different strategies. So again, establishing that tolerance is really important at the top to kind of give you guidance as to what your overall strategy should look like. Another tactic that's worked well for me is talking to the CEO about creating a cybersecurity roadmap. But again, we're not going to lead this conversation with talking about a cybersecurity roadmap. What we're going to do is use an analogy. What is something that a CEO would understand today? And one example that I've used in the past, that's worked really well, is this idea of a fire plan. Every organization has a fire plan. Every organization is keenly aware of that, and at your CEO level, right, you can break that fire plan down into a lot of different components, from prevention, detection, mitigation, and response. In prevention, you use flame retardant materials when you build a building, physical firewalls in place, a building to code. You've got smoke detectors and fire alarms in place to help detect if a fire happens. Mitigation, sprinklers, fire extinguishers help mitigate if a fire does break out. And then when a fire does break out, what's your evacuation plan, business continuity, disaster recovery, covering your losses, property insurance, and you're doing regular testing of that plan as well. So having the conversation with the CEO where you're kind of getting this concept of a fire plan, talking about that. Once you have kind of an understanding, a mutual understanding of that, now you can shift the conversation to say, you know what, a cybersecurity plan, actually pretty similar to a fire plan. You have prevention, you have detection, mitigation, and response. And there's a lot of different elements that go along with a cybersecurity plan that actually line up really nicely with a fire plan. Instead of building with flame retardant materials, you're going to have a security first mindset for your application development. Instead of physical firewalls, network firewalls to segment your environment, utilizing security frameworks and compliance as you're building, your cybersecurity strategy, and so on. But the concept here is using that analogy that the CEO understands really well to help explain why having a roadmap for cybersecurity is important.
And what I really like about this is that it gets across the multi-layered approach. You're not going to ignore everything with prevention or detention or detection for a fire. You're not just going to say, oh, okay, everybody, we have a fire. It happens. Let's leave. You're going to do everything you can all along the way to stop it at any point in its progression. And similarly with cybersecurity, not doing anything and simply saying, oh, don't worry, we have insurance, that'll pay out when we get nailed. That really is not a comprehensive look, and ultimately it's really not going to serve the company or your customers.
So another great conversation to have at the top is having a conversation with your CFO. And the conversation with the CFO, we're going to take a little bit different approach to it than what the conversation we had with the CEO. With the CFOs love quantified risk. Quantified risk is something that they live and breathe every day. And so the challenge upon you is to help the CFO quantify your cybersecurity risk. And a great analogy that I use in this conversation is talking about floods. Let's suppose, as an example, you have a building that's in a 100-year floodplain. And if a flood were to occur, there would be a $10 million loss of materials, the building damage itself, productivity loss. You can apply a very simple formula to get to a point where you can annualize your risk in real dollars and cents, right? You take that $10 million single loss event and you multiply it by the percent chance of occurrence. In a 100-year floodplain, your percent chance occurrence is 1% a year. Do the math and you get yourself to $100,000 a year. That's your annualized risk in that particular situation. Now, the challenge upon you is trying to quantify your cybersecurity investments in a very similar way. Cybersecurity investments can be very subjective in nature, but we want to try to get to that quantified risk as much as we can. And Frank's going to talk about that here in a minute. But before we move on, another tactic to use is thinking about different risk types in this conversation. Oftentimes, as cybersecurity professionals, we focus on reduction of risk. What can I do to reduce that percent chance of occurrence? But there's other tactics that you can take. For example, focusing on not only reducing the chance of occurrence, but how do I mitigate the damage that would occur if an event were to happen, right? So taking that single loss event number and bringing that down. Maybe there's investments in your flood example, there's investments that you can make to divert water or otherwise protect the building that would make that single loss event, instead of $10 million, it'd be $5 million. You're now working both sides of that risk and helping to bring that number down. There's other risks types that you want to have in the back of your mind as well. Insurance, flood insurance is a great way to transfer risk. And in the cybersecurity world, there's cyber liability insurance that can help you transfer your risk to another entity. And there's a lot of other tactics that you can do to manage risk. But again, the point here is the conversation with CFO, we're still on this risk train, but we're trying to get to a quantified risk to help drive that conversation.
Yes, and before I forget, I want to make sure any questions or thoughts that you're interested in sharing or stories that you have, you're welcome to put those into the question and answer box. We'll address those at the end. We made sure to save some time there. So as they come along, feel free to type those in as we go. In order to help quantify the risk, obviously a floodplain is a very specific thing. It can be harder to quantify the risk from a cybersecurity breach. Something that a lot of people have found to be very helpful is trying to do a third-party risk assessment, again, also known as an ethical hacking engagement or pen test. Just like if you feel sick, you have a stomach ache, for let's say, when you go to the doctor, they don't immediately start to check out the stomach. They check out your vital signs. What's your temperature? What's your blood pressure? They go through all of those various things in order to help get a baseline for how all of you is operating. And similarly, it helps to have an outside perspective, be able to take a look and say, okay, what is it that we need to address? Where are our weaknesses and how would we potentially be attacked? Lots of issues that we see when we do pen tests with our customers is a lot of issues often predate the current staff. Obviously, people get promoted, people come and go from companies. Some of the most glaring issues have been around for a long time from old systems. Even though it's 2021, sometimes we'll come across service accounts from 10 or more years ago that still have a username of admin and a password of admin. They're still out there, and those can still give you access to an entire system. And so having a comprehensive review of seeing where you're at right now really helps quantify that risk.
And let's not forget about the people. So another conversation to have at the top with your senior leadership is talk with your human resources person, talk with your person responsible for your marketing efforts, and get them involved in the development of your cybersecurity plan. An important element of any good cybersecurity plan is an incident response plan. What happens when a breach occurs and how do we react to that? Oftentimes, incident response plans are very focused on the people aspects. What do people need to do? How do people need to respond when these things occur? And so getting your people leaders involved and those who are really good at messaging to people involved in developing an incident response plan it's a great way to get buy-in, and it's a great way to get them to a point where they can help implement this strategy across your organization. Another thing to consider here too is when you're talking with your marketing leader is think of turning your marketing team inwards as you're going to implement your cybersecurity strategy, there's a lot of messaging that's going to go along with it, because we need to change behaviors. We need to get people to do the right things. Your marketing team is probably pretty good at delivering messages to your customers. So maybe there's an opportunity where they can help you in the implementation of your cybersecurity plan and developing that message and how we're going to get this across to staff.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because that's taking extra work off your plate. You're leveraging their skills, and it's also actually a kind of a sneaky way to help bring about this organizational change, since they're part of the messaging of security is everyone's responsibility. They can then be a spokesperson for that in their internal departments, marketing, HR, whoever you bring on as part of getting the message out. They're hearing the message again and again and again, and then they're going to be a spokesperson or contact point or champion within their individual departments as well. So there's multiple benefits to bringing additional people on board as part of the effort.
So this is a question: what happens if leadership's not fully on board? So pro tip, you're not going to have one conversation with your CEO and one conversation with your CFO and expect the checkbook to open and you to be able to implement your comprehensive cybersecurity plan in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, reality is that's very unlikely to be the case. There's budget constraints, there's people constraints, there's other organizational objectives that have to be juggled around. And so it's okay if leadership's not fully on board at the beginning, right? Think of cybersecurity implementations as a continuum. It's an ongoing effort. You don't just do it once and set it and forget it. As it becomes a part of your organizational strategy, it's going to need constant care and feeding, right? So when you're having those conversations with senior leadership, what's really effective is to, as we've talked about, changing that message to be applicable to the audience that you're giving that message to. Eliminate jargon. Don't use acronyms. Don't use technical terms. Speak in terms that people understand. Recognize that building the case takes time. Maximize what blessing you are given. Perhaps you ask for 10 things and you only get budget or approval to do 2 or 3. That's okay. Go do those 2 or 3. Do them really, really well. And take that back to your senior leadership and say, look how we've reduced our risk by doing these things. We can reduce our risk even more if we do these next 3 things. Just recognize that it's not a one-time deal here. It's something that you, in order to get implemented well in an organization, will take time.
Yeah, and a big part of bringing about a security culture change and improving the overall security of the company. It's very easy for security and IT people who live and breathe in systems to have IT be the focus of all of those things. If we get X product, then it's going to do X, Y, Z. It's very concrete. It's very easy to latch onto. But just like we shared earlier with the story of the best technology being undone by a human, you really have to put emphasis on both the IT side, the system side, as well as the human side. Michael, what are some things that you found helpful in bringing the rest of the staff on board?
Yeah, so we've already said we want to make sure that when we're developing our cybersecurity plans, that they're organizational focused. They're not just focused on leaders or just on IT. And what we want to do, some strategies that have worked well for me in getting staff on board is think about ways that you can get your cybersecurity plan to a place where it's thought of by your staff just like your fire plan. We talked earlier about that. We talked about the CEO understanding what that fire plan is and all the elements that go about it. But think about your staff. What happens when the fire alarm goes off? It's second nature for people to know, as soon as I hear the fire alarm, I'm going to get up out of my chair. I'm going to follow an evacuation route. I'm going to meet at a predefined point. And it just happens. You don't have to you don't have to tell people what to do. It just happens. Well, why is it that just happens? Well, there's a lot of reasons. You practice it regularly. You have fire drills. You have policies and procedures in place that talk about the evacuation route and the rally point and things of that nature. There's signage and alarms. We talked about the fire alarm, right? But there's a lot of things to kind of reinforce that message. So it just becomes automatic for people to do the right thing when there's a fire. So again, using that analogy, how do we get our cybersecurity plan to that point? Well, we can use a lot of the same elements, right? First and foremost, practicing your cybersecurity strategy. What are the things that we need to do when there's a breach? What are the things we need to do when people get a bad email or get a bad phone call? Practice those things regularly with your staff so they know what they're supposed to do and it just becomes a reflex. Reinforce those strategies in different ways. Don't just put out policies and procedures and expect a cybersecurity plan to work. Reinforce that message with signage, with newsletters, with town hall meetings and bringing it up as a topic there. The more times they hear about it, the more automatic what you need them to do is going to become. And make sure that it's digestible as well. Easy to follow instructions. 80 pages of policies and procedures are going to be tough to swallow, but if there are particular things in your cybersecurity strategy that you need people to focus on that one thing and deliver an easy to follow message that's easily digestible to help get people on board. Another great way is, policies and procedures. I've hit on it a couple times. They're really, really important, an important component to cybersecurity strategy, but they tend to be reactive in nature and punitive in nature, right? Humans respond a lot better to positive and to rewarding and to success versus failure. So as we're thinking about our messaging and our strategies and implementing this program across the organization, how do we focus on success? How do we focus on what we want people to do versus what we don't want them to do, right? Well, there's a couple ways we can do that. Security awareness training is a great way. Putting in a security awareness training program that focuses on the right things to do, great way to reinforce that positive behavior. Some other things, the little tidbits I'll give from my experience, things that I've seen work in organizations that I've implemented. They don't have to be expensive. They can be cheap and easy, but they can have a lot of positive impact. So here's a couple of them. In one organization, I empowered my IT team as they went around on site. If they found computers that were unlocked, change the background of that computer to something fun like this picture here, and then go ahead and lock the computer for them. Next time the staff person comes back, they see their wallpapers change. There's a little bit of humor there. You're not punishing them for not locking their computer. You're just providing a gentle nudge, reminding them why it's important, right? Another strategy, implementing a bounty program. So for one organization, we encourage that staff to report any potential cybersecurity incidents to IT. If they got a malicious email, or if they got a weird phone call, or there was some weird guy walking around the building, we encourage them to report that to IT. And we positively reinforce that behavior by implementing a bounty program. In this case, we gave people $10 gift cards when they would report a bounty or report an incident, potential incident, right? But it doesn't have to be even that. Just putting their name in a corporate newsletter to say, hey, congratulate these individuals. They reported a potential cybersecurity incident this month. That could be a great way to positively reinforce that behavior. Another one, change the name of the department. This was a really easy one, didn't cost anything, but in avoiding IT impersonation, it was a great way to thwart that. If you change the name of your department and staff get to a point where they know that they don't have an IT department, then if Michael from IT calls on the phone, there's a trigger in their mind that says, wait a second, I don't have an IT department, so this must be not legitimate. Again, really easy way to help avoid those IT impersonations. And then leverage your internal marketing. Your marketing team, they have messaging. That's their job, right? Is about creating messaging for your organization. Use that skill set to help develop the messaging to your organization and to your staff, so it's more well received.
So lots of different things out there. There are the IT systems, there's the humans. How are you going to get it all done? How quickly can you get it done? One way which a lot of people come at this is realizing that the security systems are expensive, but the humans needed to run those systems are even more expensive. Humans have this crazy habit of sometimes wanting to go on vacation, sick time. Obviously, security people are going to want professional development courses, and they also have a very, very high demand skill set. There's very high turnover, low availability within those cybersecurity professionals who know how to run a lot of these systems. Michael, what light can you shed on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why partnering with an MSSP is a great idea for an organization, but I'm going to focus today, the conversation today, just on people. Frank, you alluded to the fact that cybersecurity talent is in high demand and short supply. And that's what this survey, the information in front of you shows. The survey was just completed a couple months ago. This particular organization's been doing this survey for many years. And what it shows is an over 3 million person gap in cybersecurity talent across the globe. 376,000 open and unfilled cybersecurity positions just in the United States. And of those organizations surveyed, 64% of them reported a lack of cybersecurity talent is preventing them from successfully implementing their strategy or other business objectives. To compound that, let's say that you're lucky enough to actually get a cybersecurity professional to help you with your program. Keeping them is equally as difficult for a lot of the same reasons. In this particular survey, those who responded, well over half of them are getting calls from recruiters at least a few times a month, some as many as 5 to 10 times a week, calling them about new opportunities. And again, same group surveyed, a staggering number, 63% reported as actively taking those calls, listening to the recruiters and seeing what their options are out there. It's a supply and demand challenge, and the supply is low and the demand is high. And so this is not unusual, if you will.
Yeah, and something that I think is important to underline with that high number of people actively looking for another opportunity, part of what contributes to that is when they find themselves in a culture that is back where we started the webinar, where the IT department or the security person or individual people, they're the ones that are going to be left holding the bag. If they feel like it's just a matter of time before they're the ones on the line, they're the ones left having to pay the piper, then they're going to be looking to move out of the organization if the organization itself is not all on the same page of moving forward with security. If that message from leadership is, hey, you just go ahead and fix it, but you're in trouble if anything happens, versus that ongoing dialogue. And so, this is something which is an entire company issue. And part of why we're having the webinar is let's have the entire company move forward, build that more accepting and singular culture that really is focused on tackling the issue.
Yeah, to stay on the supply and demand challenge here, it should be no surprise that when supply is low and demand is high, the price goes up, right? So this is a LinkedIn post that was on my feed a couple of weeks ago. Recruiter looking for cybersecurity professionals. In this case, this organization is looking for 3 senior security engineers, paying 140 to 170 plus 20% plus equity. Those are big numbers. I've worked small to mid-sized business my entire career, and oftentimes that could be your entire cybersecurity budget, right? So partnering with an MSSP, I've seen a lot of success in that in the past in leveraging those dollars that you would otherwise put towards hiring personnel to implement your strategy in partnering with an MSSP. And what you get out of that is not just one individual's effort, right? So when you go and hire a cybersecurity professional, you're hiring their talent, you're hiring their skills, their knowledge. Oftentimes, cybersecurity programs they're very comprehensive. They've got a lot of breadth, and that one individual may not have all of the talent, all of the skills required to successfully implement a program. Partnering with an MSSP, you're partnering with a team of security professionals that have lots of different skill sets. That you can plug into your organization when needed and where needed, rather than just having that one individual. Remember, there is a difference, and the difference is growing between IT staff and security staff. That's what a lot of small to mid-sized organizations I've seen will do is when they start to focus on cybersecurity, they'll pluck somebody out of their IT department and say, okay, you're the security guy now, go make it happen. Well, the skill set is very different. In a lot of ways, when you think about the difference between a systems engineer and an application developer, cybersecurity talent is getting that much splintered away from IT. And so having access to people where cybersecurity is their profession is going to have a lot more value to you. And partnering with an MSSP, you get access to that. And also think about the fact that your cybersecurity efforts may not be consistently one FTE or in multiples of FTEs. At the beginning or the implementation of a program, you may need 80 hours a week worth of effort, or 90 hours a week of effort, or 30 hours a week, right? And then over time, maybe that need will go up or down based on your initiatives, what you're trying to implement. Again, partnering with an MSSP where you can scale that up or down a lot easier than having those permanent staff it's a great way to tackle that need. So just some elements, like I said, there's a lot of reasons why partnering with an MSSP is makes a lot of sense. We're focusing just on the people effort here today, but I've seen a lot of success for those reasons in that partnership.
Yeah, so wrapping up a lot of these things, how do you prioritize? Where do you get started? First thing is starting at the top, having that regular cadence of communication with those needs. Don't just go to them at budget time when everyone else is also trying to get budget dollars for their individual projects, and expect to be able to have a comprehensive long-term company culture shifting discussion. They're not in that mode. Have regular cadence of communication, specifically make sure you're aligned on their risk tolerance. Do they want to stay out of headlines, or some variation of that? What's their intent? What is it that they want you to be able to accomplish? We recommend a pen test, third-party risk assessment in order to help establish what your current risk is, help quantify that for the CFO and determine what the risk is to the business. If you're considering engaging an MSSP, managed security services provider, help them determine that early on. If they have expertise over here, that allows you to focus over here. Set your strategy for who handles what early, and that's going to open you up to be able to put more time and effort onto what's going to be on your plate. Hit low cost, high impact items for quick wins. This is again going to be helpful for that communications loop with the leadership and continuing to get their support. When they see that, hey, we're knocking some things off the list, we're making progress, it's gone well so far, that's going to make it that much easier to continue to bless and endorse the additional things on your list. Before long, you really want to start to get into those ongoing, continual staff-wide initiatives. Security awareness training is something where you don't just want to have a presentation once per year. The fact of the matter is they're not going to remember everything. And then in the remaining 11 months of the year, you're going to have new staff come on who haven't heard that, much less the people who heard it once. They're probably not going to remember everything. So get those ongoing staff-wide initiatives started soon. Just to underline that last point, the human factor is such an important aspect of the cybersecurity realm. I'm taking a poll here from Hacker Combat on LinkedIn, in which respondents were taking a look at what's the weakest link in cybersecurity. It's a little bit of a trick question here, because weak passwords in many ways are really part of the human factor. You have humans picking the weak passwords, and you have humans enabling weak passwords to be selected. In other words, not enough characters, not enough complexity, etc. And so you can really boil this down to about 96% of respondents agreed that the weakest link was people and their habits. And so in light of that, taking a look at some other statistics that are out there for phishing specifically, which is a malicious email intended to get you to either click and download something through a link or submit some credentials online to give you access to company systems. Various statistics out there, typically it's in the 50 to 90% of security incidents involve targeting users. In addition, 32%, and again, you can have statistics which say higher than this, breaches specifically involve phishing emails. Looks like around 20% of compromises happen specifically with executives. So that's something that you want to have with that conversation with them in determining just how big of a deal this is. And then speaking from our experience with our ethical hackers in recent engagements, just one of our phishing emails, so not a continual campaign trying to hit a company again and again and again, just from one email, we've sometimes had up to 20 to 30% of recipients actually submit their network credentials, not just see the email, but actually submit their network credentials. Obviously, very, very dangerous. From there, you can do all kinds of different things. So in light of all these threats and how important the security awareness training is, our next webinar is going to be titled Stories from a CSO, Security Awareness Training Which Works. We'll be having a guest speaker. His name is Dan Lorman. He's previously worked for the state of Michigan as CIO, CISO, and CSO for the state of Michigan. He's formerly an analyst with the NSA. He's a well-known author and speaker. He's currently the chief strategist and chief security officer at a company called Security Mentor. That webinar is happening on May 20th at 1 p.m. on our company LinkedIn page. I believe we should have posted there now the sign up for that. So if you're not doing so already, please follow Networks Group on LinkedIn and RSVP for that event on May 20th at 1 p.m. We've now moved to the end of our official content. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask those there in the Q&A session. If you like additional information, whether it be feedback on the session today or interest in anything that Networks Group might be able to do for you, my contact information is on the screen. I love pulling in people from the team in order to discuss what we can do to help with any concerns or questions or thoughts that you might have. So our official content has ended now. Michael and I are going to be around here for a little while to field any questions you might have. Michael, I specifically want to thank you for sharing this with us and your experience. You've clearly seen a lot and done a lot to help organizations along the way. So many thanks for that.
Yeah, you're right. I'm happy to share.
Yeah. So I got a question here for you, Michael. This is coming from Jim. What resources or websites do you recommend to stay current on information? SANS, for example.
The answer is yes. My tactic there is to absorb as much as possible. I use LinkedIn a lot to follow InfoSec, what's going on in cybersecurity, what are the latest breaches. So I follow a lot of organizations, a lot of security magazines, and security blogs, things of that nature via LinkedIn. But social media is any social media can be a great outlet as well. Facebook, Twitter, etc. Follow the big guys like SANS. That's great, but also follow some of the smaller guys as well. If there's particular authors or particular bloggers that may not have as huge a reach as SANS, they can also offer a lot of advice. I like to think of myself as a practical executor of cybersecurity, hoping that I shared practical tips today. There's a lot of people out there on LinkedIn and social media that take that very similar approach and get out of the theoretical and get into the practical. This is how I do this. This is what challenges I've faced, and I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, I'll echo that, and that is I would recommend LinkedIn in particular because there are a lot of people who are very vocal in the InfoSec world or information security or cybersecurity world that are sharing very current things and are going to provide a fairly unfiltered view of that. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. Shameless plug for Dan Lorman, who we mentioned is the next speaker. He has 22,000 or so followers on LinkedIn. And he regularly puts out a lot of different information. Brian Krebs, last name is Krebs, has a lot of good information. There are many good resources out there. Another question, should we follow you on Twitter or just LinkedIn? Speaking for myself, and Michael, you can answer. I'm not really active on Twitter, but I'm active on LinkedIn. Frank Whiting is, I'm there. And Michael, are you under your name as well?
Yes, sir. LinkedIn is a great way. I am getting more active on LinkedIn and sharing cybersecurity related topics pretty frequently on my page now. So yeah, feel free to give me a follow, and hopefully I'll get you some good information that way.
Yes. Sounds good. Additional questions, and thank you, by the way, for that, Jim. Any other thoughts or questions out there? I love it. It's that moment where if you ask the one last one, you're like, oh no, it better be a good one. And I got another question. Do you recommend a multi-factor authentication for VPN access to all users? I know my answer. Michael, your thought?
MFA whenever, wherever possible. VPN is a really important one, because think of when you're VPNing in, what you're essentially doing is extending your private network across to other networks. You're creating that bridge, if you will. So a home user establishing that VPN, now their home computer is is part of your internal private network and what they have access to. So yes, absolutely, MFA for VPN, but don't just focus on VPN. Organizations are shifting to the cloud. A lot of software as a service is in play now. Think about implementing MFA for those solutions as well, because as easy as it is for you and your staff to access those systems, it's also easy for the bad guys. So having those protections in place to make sure that the identity of the person logging in is legitimate is really, really helpful in securing those environments.
Yeah, and I'll back that 100%. I know talking with the ethical hackers on our hacking team, it just gets way too easy for them if there's anything that's out there that doesn't have multi-factor authentication. Again, it's not the end all to the be all, or whatever the phrase is. I shared the story earlier of how you can still have humans undo multi-factor authentication, all that, but it really does go a long way. So
one other point I'll put on there too is assume your username and password is compromised somewhere, right? So
yes.
Multi-factor authentication brings that second level of authentication. So if your username and password is compromised, it still can't access, because you need that second factor, that thing you have, whether it's your phone or a token or what have you.
Mm-hmm. And especially because so many people reuse passwords. Password managers are a great thing to help keep them unique, keep them complex, keep them different. But there's so many passwords that are reused that, again, if XYZ website or application gets compromised, then those credentials are out there in the dark web, and it just makes it so much easier to access your system with those reused credentials. Michael, I'm going to defer to you. How frequently should we use MFA for cloud application access? Every login, once a day, once a week? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that is going to depend on it's going to differ for every organization. So this is something we didn't cover in the webinar, but something as you're considering your your cybersecurity strategy is there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to cybersecurity. Every organization is going to have different priorities, different levels of tolerance for risk. And so the answer to that question is really going to depend on what is the balance for your organization between security and availability, right? The more difficult you make it to log into systems, the bigger chance there is for a loss of productivity, a loss of efficiency, things of that nature for people who can't log in. So you got to find that right balance, and that balance is going to be different, not only for every organization, but that balance might be different for every application, right? Access to medical records might have a very different security approach than access to publicly known information or not confidential information.
Yeah. And again, other questions are still welcome. Tag teaming that with that, Michael, is also consider what is the risk of where it's being accessed from? Is it coming from a work from home environment, and you don't know what other computers are on the network, what other traffic is on the network, what's being done in people's spare time, or is it being accessed in public locations versus within a company building? And again, the type of information that's being accessed, there's not a one size fits all. There is a balance between MFA every hour and every month. The balance is going to be in there. Thanks for that, Jim. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, and as we wrap up here, if there are any other questions that you come up with after the end of this webinar, feel free to reach out to Frank. He'll engage the right folks within our organization to get you answers. We're happy to help in any way we can.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been great having everybody here. I hope it's been beneficial. Again, feel free to send along any comments or questions or things that you think we can do better. We're always interested in feedback. Even if it's not perfectly positive, that's okay. We're happy to hear what you have to say, and we look forward to helping you in any way we can. So best of luck, everyone. Hope you all have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.